Nope. Okay, so we will have to then approve the January minutes a different way. Actually, does anyone know, Leslie, are we allowed to approve January minutes if I sent them over email? Oh, actually, we have another meeting next week. Forget it. I'll just send you for the meeting next week and we'll approve the January minutes next week.
Yeah, we can't do that over the email.
Okay, no problem. It'll be easy. I'll do it next week. We have 3 bites of the apple this month, so it won't be a problem. Okay, excellent. We have a special guest, a returnee tonight, and that is Christina Diaz-Torres is back. Monique won't be able to join us tonight. She had a conflict, but she's very sorry about that. She's looking forward to joining us, and since we have 3 March meetings, we really have lots of opportunity for her to join us this month. And so Christina offered to come and be our school board liaison tonight. And since she knows back well and knows the budget well and knows this process well, we were very happy to have her, as well as just being happy to have her in general, since she was such a great back colleague all that time. For those of you who don't remember her on the back, she was on the back. How many years were you on the back, Christina? Several. 4, 5?
I think it was 4. It might have been 3.5 because I think I joined mid-year one year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we're pleased to have you back for the evening. Our plan for this evening is I will, after I kind of go through what our plan is, I will let Christina start and give us some of her thoughts as our board representative for this evening about the proposed budget and the process and what the board is going to go through and how we can support them this year. Then we're actually going to go through an exercise. This has happened a little more organically the last couple of years. And so I talked to Leslie and we agreed that we would structure it to have a budget overview. So Leslie will walk us through a little more detailed overview of the budget with some Q&A. And so we really can think together about the structure of the budget and have a chance to make sure we're all on the same page. Ask her some good questions about the budget and get us all started on the same footing before we dive into the discussion around the budget. And I'm going to make sure we have plenty of time for that because it's our time to ask Leslie our questions and really make sure we understand the budget and the different parts and pieces before we jump in and start to give our thoughts on it. And then I'm going to set up the exercise that I want us to go through over the next couple of weeks to get to our recommendations and how I think we should collect our thoughts and comments. And I will give an overview of that tonight and we'll start to do those discussions. And then I'm going to give everyone some homework because I think the only way that this will work is if we all lean in and we send comments and thoughts to me in between the meetings for us to then discuss and refine in the meetings, and we'll do that a couple rounds of that. It's a little bit like we have more time to go through this process than we did in the fall when we pulled together our thoughts and recommendations for areas that would be budget savings. We did this exercise together as a committee in the fall. We just had to do more of it asynchronously because we didn't have time to left discuss. And the nice thing about March is we have a lot more time to talk about the suggestions everyone has. And so I'm going to set up an exercise that's quite like what we did in the fall, except that we have a lot more time for discussion in between the collection of those thoughts. And I will be the one putting them on paper to help us in between meetings, but I'll need your help. So I will set up that exercise at the end of this meeting and we can start it. And then that will get us ready for next Wednesday's meeting and the following Wednesday's meeting. The last meeting of this 3 series is when we're going to have Reed Goldstein come back and talk about his equity funding formula. I sent you all a 1-pager, I think, after the last meeting and said that he would come and see us in March. And I think the best time for him to come is at the end of this to give us a good 2.5 meetings to talk about the budget. And then he can come at the end because his idea is really setting us up for next year's budget and would be a good way to close off these 3 meetings. And he specifically wanted to talk to us in March because he's on a deadline for his project. And so it couldn't wait until April, which is why we're taking an hour out of our meetings here in March. So that's our plan and how we're going to walk through this evening. But any questions before I turn it over to Christina for her thoughts, comments, and words of wisdom to kick us off? I have a hand up, and Leslie.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just want to remind everyone that we are recording the meeting, so just be aware of that. And I know that there are people who want to see previous meetings. We are still working on how to get all of these recordings available out of APS to the public. We're not the only advisory group that's having this issue. So they're working on something. I think they're pretty close, but they need to make sure it works first.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us that the recording has started. Okay.
I actually remembered tonight.
Thank you. Yes, that's great. That's great. And it'll be great when we can get those recordings made available to others. But to kick us off, Christina, would you like to do so?
I am happy to kick us off. This is very odd. It was only a couple of months ago that I was at my last BAC meeting. So it's great to see a lot of familiar faces and also some new faces. Welcome. If I'm slightly biased, this is definitely the best advisory committee. I'm not supposed to be biased, but I'm a little bit biased. So if you've already heard, if you listened to the last school board meeting or the work session where we were presented the budget, a lot of what I'm about to say is going to sound very familiar. But I want to start by stating what I'm seeing in this budget and what I'm excited about in this budget and also what concerns me. I would state this all as just one board member. I do not claim to represent the board, but as one board member and as a former BAC member, I felt like it was my responsibility to give you all my 2 cents so far. This budget is designed, and I give all of the admiration to Leslie and her team for really designing something that is going to get us through. The reality of the situation is that it's been a year, but we are still in a place of dramatic uncertainty with the pandemic, with federal funding, with state funding. The rules are changing. The rules of the game are changing every single day. And they are changing at rapid fire pace. And this is a budget that's designed to get us through that process. It's also, to my mind, a budget that's designed to set us up for success in the long run. There are a couple of things that I see here that are really critical, that are going to help our system grow in the future. And some additions that are really important, particularly for our most vulnerable learners, are special education additions, as well as additions that are focused on English learners. So those I was really excited to see. Where I'm really interested in y'all's feedback is how do we make this balance? The reality is that we're not going to be able to get 42 million out of the federal government. We can probably get some of that, but we're not going to get all of it. So we are going to have to we're likely to have to make some cuts unless some sort of a miracle happens. If anyone has an in with Congress, let me know. We definitely need that. But we are going to need to figure out what are the cuts that we can make, whether they are short-term or long-term, that are going to get us through. And if you've heard Melanie talk about this before, the other thing that we need to be thinking about, it's not just about this year. It's also about the years to come. And we're looking at the projections of what our budget deficits are going to be several years from now, they start to balloon. And that's normal for those of us who've been on the BAC for a while. We've seen that in the past, but it's also something to keep in mind. How do we make decisions now that are not going to tie our hands in the future? And that's what I'm really looking for. As one board member, I'm looking for your feedback on that particular note. There are some cuts in here that are incredibly painful. And so I want to hear from you all, what are the angles that we're not seeing? What are the stories that we're not hearing? And what are the perspectives that have not been brought to bear about the impacts of particular cuts? And as you're thinking about the things that are going to be non-negotiables for you as community members and for the collective as a committee, please make sure that you're sharing that nuance with us so that we're not losing that in the fray. I think that's particularly important. As a former member, I have a couple of pro tips for the newer members. Make sure you read the entire budget, particularly paying attention to the executive summary, but it really does get more detailed and you really start to understand how things piece together after you get past that executive summary right around page 250. And you start seeing the details about how different departments are constructed or built together and what they're funding and what we're looking at. And so, yes, it takes a lot of time. I spent about 14 hours this weekend going through it myself and taking copious notes. But it is worth it for you to understand what you're talking about. And the more that you all as a committee understand exactly what you're talking about and what the implications are, the better informed decisions you all can make. And so, yes, it's an investment of your time, but trust me, it's worth it. It also just helps you gain so much more confidence in being able to have these conversations. I remember my first budget season, I didn't quite get all the way through, and I felt somewhat lost at times. And that was a significant lesson learned for me, that I needed to make sure that I was going back through. And actually, I still have many of my budget books that sit right behind my desk, and they have sticky notes and scribbles in the margins from years past. So highly recommend doing that. The other thing that I recommend is coming up with a criteria for yourself. What are the things that you do not agree with, and the things that you think are going to be problematic? And then what are the cuts that are unpalatable, but we might need to take them? The things that you wouldn't want to take in a normal year, but we might have to do them this time. And then figure out how you're going to color code that and notate that for yourself. It's really helpful, especially when you're trying to think of the bigger picture, to be able to kind of zoom back and see, like, these are the things that I agree with, these are the things that I disagree with. And it'll help you advocate more as you're coming to your collective recommendations. So that's my 2 cents on how to go about this process and my overall take on the budget. As far as process goes, Monique does report out every single meeting, as every liaison has done in the past. But we particularly care about making sure that the report that you all generate is going to be nuanced and thorough and accurately representing the opinions of the committee. So just make sure that you're giving all of your intel to Melanie, really refining all of the comments, and making sure that it's a nuanced and detailed take of where you all are landing. And thank you all so much for the work. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. This is one of the hardest working committees. And it's been such an honor to serve with you all. And it's an honor to now serve in this different capacity. But I'm excited to be here tonight and happy to answer any additional questions that you all have.
Thank you, Christina. Any questions for Christina? That was a helpful way to launch us into the evening, Christina. Spoken like a pro, someone who has done this a few times from our chair and now is doing it from a different chair with even higher stakes. And so we appreciate that. And we appreciate the willingness with which you will review our comments. And we will take all of that to heart as we think about the budget over the next few weeks, and as we then collect and really finalize those comments for our report. So thank you very much. And we appreciate you being here tonight. So don't be silent as we go through the rest of the evening. We welcome your comments and thoughts. And I have one comment. And there's a thank you for you in the chat. Okay, Leslie. You're next, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Hope you all had a fun weekend reading the budget.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I just said absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. I had a break this weekend. I was very happy that I didn't work this weekend. So, all right. So first thing I'm going to do is talk about the overview that we did at the budget work session last week. I'm going to go over it very quickly and not spend quite as much time on it as I did last week. But I think everybody should see it and understand it. This is what we presented to the school board that showed all of the numbers and why we are where we are. So everyone should see the presentation from last week, the budget overview. I hope. Oh, I skipped revenue for some reason. All right, there we go, revenue. All right. So we do revenue and expenditures, and every year when we start the budget process, we start with whatever the current year budget is, and that's the baseline for all of the changes that we make in the budget as we go through the budget development process. So for FY21, our budget totals $670.3 million. And that's our starting point. And then on the revenue side, we look at what is revenue doing between now and next year. Is it going up? Is it going down? And by how much? And then we put all of those changes into the budget. So county revenue is going up 300,000. Our local revenue, which is fees and tuition, is going down 800,000. State funds going down 500,000. This is based on the governor's proposed budget. The General Assembly did adopt a budget on Saturday, but we do not have yet the information from VDOE as to exactly what Arlington Public Schools is going to be receiving. So we will see what that looks like when we get it. That is typically something that we update at a later work session, because then we get updates on county revenue and we get enrollment, the spring enrollment update as well. So we'll be seeing that as we go down the road. And then federal revenue is going to go up slightly, 600,000. So total revenue from this year to next year actually goes down slightly. It goes down about $400,000. And then we have our reserves. And last year when we did the FY21 budget, which is the current year, we used $16.5 million from our reserves to help balance our budget, because that was May of 2020, 2 months after we started into the lockdown and school closure. And we thought this would be a more short-lived event and that we would be on the other side of this by now. So we used reserves to help us balance the budget, because we knew that we needed to do something and we didn't want to do anything too drastic, knowing that things were going to come back. But of course, that hasn't happened yet. And then we are using about $8.5 million in the FY22 budget to offset one-time costs, and also to partially offset some of the expenditures that we typically have used reserves to help us mitigate the change of. And those things are debt service, our VRS, which is Virginia Retirement System. The school board is, all the employees of Arlington Public Schools are under the Virginia Retirement System, and the Virginia Retirement System and the General Assembly set our contribution rates. We have absolutely no say in those. So, they tell us, okay, now you're going to have to pay $2 million more or $5 million more a year, depending on what the rate change is. So we have to pay that. So we set up a reserve to help us defray some of that cost. And then also the compensation reserve to help us offset part of the cost of compensation. The debt service reserve and the compensation reserve will be fully used up after from this budget. We actually don't have enough to offset 50% of the increase, which is what we've typically done in the past. But we did use 50%. We did use the VRS reserve to offset 50% of the increases in VRS. So because we're not using as many reserves in this year's budget as we did last year, you can see that instead of having $669.8 million in revenue, we have $661.9 million, which is $9.2 million less than we had before. $9.4 million, excuse me. So that's the starting point, down from where we were in the current year, but with some expenditure pressures, and we're going to go over those real quick. So on the expenditure side, we do the same thing. We start with the current year budget, and then we add or subtract to that. First thing we do is look at what salaries and benefits are for the employees that are current and on board, because when we budget in one year, by the fall of the year, that same year, we can we know who's in the positions, right? When we add a bunch of positions, or when people retire and the positions change, the incumbents change over the course of the summer, then in the fall we have a completely different lineup of employees, and so the costs change. And as a result, we see that we saved $3.6 million just from what we budgeted for all these positions and what we actually need to spend for the positions in the current year. We need $2.2 million for VRS rate changes and for health insurance increases. The FY21 budget, the FY21 budget had about $6.3 million in one-time costs. So those things that we would only be purchasing in that 1 year. And we eliminated all of those one-time costs, as we do every year. Debt service is going up. Our baseline services in the operating fund are going up, as well as in the other funds. Now, the baseline services and other funds are offset completely by change in revenue. So this increase of $0.3 million is completely offset by an increase on the revenue side of $0.3 million. We have a new school building opening this year. We also have 3 schools that are moving, and we also have the Ed Center opening. So we have additional costs for the new capacity. So the startup costs for the new building, and then any additional staffing needed at the new building and also at any of the other schools with the change in the population going to each of those schools and the change in the boundaries. And then we have some one-time costs for the Ed Center project for furniture and technology so that that building can open. And then we have some replacement buses and some wireless infrastructure that is funded with one-time funds. This is something, this last line, this 1.6 million, is something that we do every year. We take it out up in the $6.3 million line with they're considered one-time costs, and then we put it back in with one-time funds in the current year. Did I hear that there was a question?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat. Leslie.
Okay. I don't see the chat, sorry.
You don't? Okay, it says, Leslie, based on the known costs now, what would you have done differently for cost-cutting items that were on the table last year from Juan? Juan, you want to add any color to that?
Well, hindsight's always 20/20. I don't know that I would have done anything differently. It's really hard to say what I would have done differently if I had known in May of last year that in March of 2021, we would still be in the position that we're in. I don't know that I can tell you what I would have done differently.
Yeah, I know we're going to be tasked with looking at items to cut for this year, and given the fact that we use such a large amount of the reserves in the current year's budget and that we've allocated already, I just wanted to know many of the items that were on the table last year, some of them are going to be back this year, and if you had to take a hard line, knowing the cost projected and actual expenditures for this year, what would you look at a little differently?
Again, I don't know that I could tell you what I would have done differently last year, knowing what I know now. I think that's really, really difficult to say.
I know we toiled and struggled last year in making a recommendation and took some hard line actions in our recommendations, and it just appears to me that those items that come up this year, and in our analysis, we need to look at some of those items that were on the table last year.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. A number of the items that were on the table last year for 1 year are back on the table this year. If you've read through all of the tiered reductions, you will see and compare them to the items that were added back. You will see that we are in fact doing exactly that. We are taking reductions that we had proposed for 1 year in FY21 and proposing them again, hopefully for 1 year again, but we just don't know. Is there another question? Yeah, Sal had a question. Are the reserves statutorily or by policy meant to be applied individually to specific expenditure categories always? Or is there a degree of fungibility to them? That's a great question. The reserves are a construct. They are categories that we have invented. Can't think of a better word at the moment for categorization. They're simply buckets to hold the funding so that the school board can use it when they so choose. There is no, the reserves are definitely not statutory in any way. We're lucky we have reserves because statutorily, all of the funds that we have left at the end of the year revert to the locality. So basically, they become county funds. But the county has always had an agreement with the school system to allow the school system to carry forward those funds. So they appropriate them back to us every year. And that's why they're ours. They're not really technically ours unless the county agrees to it. Otherwise, they belong to the county. So we're fortunate that we have them. The school board is the ones who decide where the funding goes. We recommend and they approve. And then no, they don't have to be used, in a specific way, but that is what we've done in the past. That's what we've held true to. So if we have a compensation increase and we only have so much money in the compensation reserve, we haven't in the past just gone and taken it from another reserve to make up the 50% amount that we've used, for which we've provided reserves in the past. But the school board, of course, has the ability to, when they're adopting the budget, to say, we're just going to use whatever reserves we want for whatever we want. And really, that's what happened last year with the $16.5 million. We needed money. They just took reserves and took it from wherever they had reserves available and applied them to the budget shortfall. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's perfect, actually.
Thanks.
Leslie, you also have a question from Bob. I think, Bob, is that your hand up?
Yep, it sure is.
Yes, thank you. Leslie, is it possible to merge those reserve funds, and is there any reason that we should not merge them? It seems like it might be an easier management job to not have to worry about the various categories.
That's a school board decision.
It would require their decision to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
We can't use the school board. We cannot use the school board's reserves. We cannot use any of the reserves without specific school board approval.
Okay. And is there a reason why the school board should not merge any of the reserve funds? I believe that they should not merge the ones that are funded for the capital that are funded by the bond. But other than that, all of the other reserves, I suppose, if they decide to, could be merged. And is there a reason that they would not want to do that they should not want to do that?
The capital reserves that have been funded by bond funds, as you say, are the only ones that could not be merged and just used, as desired. The separation of the reserves were for specific reasons. So, we have a health insurance reserve because we are self-insured for health insurance under the Cigna plan. And we budget based on what we think our claims are going to be. But if claims are much higher than we anticipate, then we have to pay those claims out of the current year's budget. And so we created a health insurance reserve to help us have a little bit of money set aside to pay for that, should that happen. It hasn't happened in a number of years, but it could. The separation pay reserve was set aside specifically because we have a lot of people in our school district that are eligible to retire now. And when they retire, they get a leave payout. And if more than the normal number of people decide to retire in a particular year, then the budget that we have in the base budget isn't going to be enough to pay out all of that leave. And that could be up to $2.5 million is what I think we calculated. I think it was actually more, but we decided to take $2.5 million and set that aside for that, because if it all hit in one budget year, then we would need $2.5 million more to pay for that leave payout. So there have been reasons for setting up the different reserves. Some of those still exist and some of them don't. It would be a school board decision to say, you know what, let's just get rid of the categories and make one big reserve and not worry about what we use it for. But it's a school board decision. All right, move on. No other.
I don't see any other questions in the chat or no other hands raised.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Sorry, I have to change my screen so I can see the questions and the hands raised.
I'll try to do that for you, Leslie, make it a little easier.
Great. All right, so expenditures. We have new investments that we put into the budget. So additions to the budget include enrollment growth, which includes our change in enrollment, and the school counselors at the elementary level that are based on the new SOQ ratio. We have a 2% cost of living adjustment in the budget. We have some initiatives that we started in prior years and phased them in over a number of years, one of which was the technicians and information services for the support that we need for all of our devices. And then the infrastructure and support needs is actually the financing payment for all of our technology that we purchased this year. We purchase it, we get paid back with short-term financing proceeds, and then we pay back over 3 years what those short-term financing proceeds need to be paid back. So over 3 years, over the following 3 years, we will be paying for all of the technology that we bought this year, sorry. And then we reinstated all of the reductions because the board was very, very specific in saying that all of these reductions would be for 1 year only. So we've put them all back, 9.6 million. And then we have just under 5 million of new budget requests So our total expenditures is $704.4 million, which leaves us with a $42.5 million shortfall. In order to close that shortfall, we developed tiered reductions. And tier 1 consists of reductions at the schools and departments, totaling $6.1 million, reducing some of the new budget requests, taking an additional reduction in MCMM. There was already $500,000 proposed from the department in the tier 1 reductions. This is an additional $1 million. And then using 50% of the remaining available reserve, which is all of the reserves that we have left. And then tier 2, some more department and schools reductions, some more reductions of the new requests, another reduction in MCMM. If we get this far, then we would replace the 2% COLA with a $500 one-time bonus and use 25% of the remaining available reserves. And then if we have to go even farther, then using 25% of the remaining available reserves. And it gets us really close. One thing I didn't say at the very start of all of this, I apologize, is that this revenue from the county of 0.3 million is should actually be 0.6 million. They did add another $300,000 at the last minute. We were not aware of that when we put the budget document together. So when we do the update in April for the state revenue and for county revenue, again, we're going to have more information from the county as we go through this process. We'll make that change at that point. We're going to have to make a change in county revenue anyway in April, so we'll just include that in there. So I think that's it for the overview. Yes. Get out of here and stop sharing that. Now, let's see if we have any
another question in the chat. When is the enrollment number measured?
Yeah. Okay. We look at the January 31st enrollment, and then the Planning and Evaluation Office refines their projections based on that January 31st enrollment, and then any other information that they might have at that point that they didn't have in the fall when they did the original set of projections. And we also update our special education enrollment with the most, obviously, the most recent information that we have on special education students, because that continues to change throughout the year. So we get better and better information as we go through the year and update that at that time. Any other questions?
A hand just went up. I think it is Lisa. Lisa?
You know that muting thing. Leslie, you were talking about enrollment. I thought when I read in the budget document, it was saying that enrollment wasn't based on even the 2020 number, but was from September of 2019. Are we actually going to have an update, and will you be refiguring the numbers based on our current enrollment for 2021?
I'd like to see what that said. The enrollment is not based on 2019 enrollment. It is based on let's see. Because this year is so different, so different than any other year we've ever had for trying to project enrollment. And with the impact of the pandemic on our September 2020 enrollment, the decision was used to use the September 19 enrollment as a foundational piece of the calculation, but it still looked at the September 2020 enrollment as well. It just didn't put as much weight on the September 2020 enrollment because of the fact that it declined so much because of the pandemic. So it's actually looking at September 19 enrollment and September 2020 enrollment and putting that together to provide the projections for the fall. Is that the right thing? I don't think anybody knows at this point. This is such a different year than we've ever had. It's almost impossible to say whether or not that's the right methodology for this. But I can tell you that the January 31st enrollment will only refine the projections that we already have. They're not going to go through a full-blown reprojection of all of the numbers again based on January 31st. It's just going to be somewhat of a refinement of the numbers that we already have. The total number probably won't change, but the individual schools might go up or down a little bit.
Okay, so Leslie, based on the question Reed asked you at that first budget work session, where he wondered about the new student projection piece, and the answer ended up being that we hire teachers based on that projected number. If we're going to be possibly quite a bit lower, but we will have already hired people for next year, and we don't seem to not bring them on board, even if the student enrollment is not there, would it not perhaps behoove us to make an effort to actually get a much clearer number before we're hiring all these new bodies?
I think the answer is that we would love to have a much clearer number for our enrollment in the fall. If there were someone in the world who could tell us, how do we project that based on the information that we have? That is the crux of the situation. We don't know how this pandemic is going to affect our fall enrollment, because all the people who left our school district because we weren't open could come back starting this fall, and then even more students could come, and we would be, way above where we think we are going to be. Now, we don't know. We just don't know. Are people going to come back? Are they going to stay away? Are the people who are here going to leave? We don't know. I mean, in any year, it's an art and a science doing enrollment projections. There's a scientific aspect to it, and there's an art aspect to it, which is all about gut and intuition. And this year more than ever, it's a really tough calculation. If it were simple and easy, then we'd have perfect enrollment projections every year, but it's not, and this year is an even tougher year.
Right, but we have planning evaluation, and we have parents' emails, addresses. Why don't we just ask them?
Or we don't even ask them. We could just pick a sample, right? You don't have to ask them all. We know.
Why not ask them all? It's not like it costs us any money. It's an email survey. Are you coming back or not?
No, I don't think parents know until they know if we're open. I think that would be a very imprecise response that you would end up getting. That
answer might be okay, because I know probably 30 kids who go to private schools in our neighborhood. I know half of them are not coming back. Their parents already kind of made that decision. Now, some of them could change their mind, obviously. but it is important information. If we were able to get something on that, then that helps us in a variety of different areas. So I mean, I think somehow, some way, I agree with Lisa that there's got to be a way to get some sense of what percentage might be coming back and what percentage may not be coming back, recognizing that some won't make their mind till much in the summer maybe.
So we have, I'm going to note this for sure as a topic for discussion and for our memo. I think this is one that for sure the enrollment numbers and their impact on the budget is an important one. And so we're lined up at about 5 more comments or questions. So I'm going to note this one, put it on our list for further comment. And I'm just going to keep going down the list, but I think definitely noted, and thank you for bringing this up, Lisa, and for others for jumping in. I think this is an important and valuable one. The next one, I'm going to do the 2 questions in the chat, and then I'm going to go to the folks who raised their hands because I think that was about the order that it came in. But Jen, I think you were next. You said of the FTEs reduced in Tier 1 and Tier 2, are any of those currently filled positions versus vacant and new positions?
Some are vacant, some are filled, and they're noted in each of the descriptions.
Okay. Jen, does that answer your question? You're set there?
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was a summary. That's fine.
No, we don't have a summary of exactly which ones are filled and which ones are vacant.
Okay. Chuck, were you just commenting on that discussion? You said, was this due to large numbers of private school switching?
Yeah,
yeah,
we're good.
Last discussion.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, great. Okay, and I'm moving over. Oh, actually, the hands started to go down, except Lisa, yours was still up, and I think, was that yours just up from before? Oh, yours down. Okay, and Sal, yours was up, and I think yours was up the whole time.
It was down, it was up, it was down, now it's up again.
Okay.
And if this needs to be tabled for later, just let me know. It's a related question, but I feel like I gotta ask it just to
Go ahead.
make sure I understand.
For now.
If there's 2,000 students fewer in September, and we know exactly which schools those 2,000 students are coming out of, is there anything that the budget, and that the board and the budget can sort of do to reflect that reality? I want to know the degree of sort of variability we have in, because these are school expenditures primarily impacted by that. So, are we locked in? Can we just get rid of $2,000 students worth of expenses? I want to understand because that's the question everyone's asking really is.
End up with that mismatch. I think you're asking, Leslie, what happens with that mismatch if we way over plan and then students come in much lower. Maybe Leslie, just to finish off that conversation we're having, is what happens if we come in way under budget in terms of the number of students, to just finish off that conversation we're just having.
So if enrollment is much lower than projections?
Yeah.
Well, then we've already budgeted for the staff that we need for those students that we projected for. So we have all of the staff on board at that point. So we don't do anything. They're here. They have contracts.
We're carrying more costs than we need.
Yes, we are, and we are doing that this year because our enrollment in September was much less than what we had projected it was going to be. The hard part is that we don't really know that a lot of times until way late in the process. So we might not even really know until the first week of September that, oh my gosh, our enrollment is still way down, even beyond what we expected. We look at it every week over the summer. We're constantly looking at enrollment and where schools are and whatnot. But once you've contracted with a teacher, unless the school board is willing to go through a big reduction in force right after school starts and all the classes have to be remade So in other words, your third grader who was supposed to be in class with Ms. Jones is considered a surplus and we have to reduce the force as a result, then your third grader is now going to be put with Ms. Smith because, Ms. Jones is gone. Now that child is moved to a different class 2 or 3 weeks into the school year. That's what that picture looks like. And then we have to tell teachers, I'm sorry, you don't have a contract anymore. We have to do a reduction in force so that we're not spending all this money. We've never done that before.
So this is a worthy topic for us as the back to discuss in terms of our comments, which is if this is something that we see that we want to advise the school board to pull back on those estimates now, given the implications, right? So if we think that I think this is where Lisa was going, that if we feel like those numbers are too high in the budget and there are implications that we are planning too much staff and too many expenses in the budget, and that we could get into a situation where we're either carrying too much cost next year or, God forbid, that we have to plan some actions around that, is what Leslie was just describing, and that therefore we want to advise the board to pull back in the budget from those projections, given where we are today and the likelihood we think that we would get to where the budget projects. That would be, for example, a comment that we would put in our report for the board. And so this is exactly the type of thing I'll set up at the end of the meeting that we would then put in our notes, discuss as a committee, write in our report, and put in terms of a back comment about this is what we suggest in terms of our observations. That would be the type of thing that we could write down and say as a committee, here's one of our observations on the budget and what we think. But that could come out, and it seems like there's a lot of commentary around this. But I've noted it as something for us to discuss.
Yeah. And I want to say that on the flip side of that, should we decide that, should the school board decide that the projections are overshooting what they think enrollment is actually going to be, and they say, okay, change it so that it reflects something less, and we hire teachers accordingly, and we find come, August, that our numbers are coming in much higher than we expected. Now we're stuck trying to hire teachers, and it could be a lot of teachers in August and September when the pool is it's there's nothing left. We find ourselves in that position sometimes each year anyway, but it's a handful of teachers, not 50 teachers. And, depending on which way the projections go, we could find ourselves in that position. The principals I know would be the first to say, no, don't do that, because that could really affect the school. So something to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the discussion every year with principals, about hiring early versus not hiring early.
None of this is easy. So you're absolutely right to explain there's two sides of this, just like everything. None of this is going to be easy. Yeah.
Before you pivot, I just want to add a little bit onto what Leslie just mentioned. This is a very delicate balance that requires a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. And so any conversation about this particular topic is going to require a very delicate hand to balance all of the tensions that we're feeling. We truly don't know what the rate of return from other jurisdictions and or private schools is going to be. And it's something that we've never predicted before because it's never happened at this rate before. So we have to be very judicious about that. The other thing that I want to make is just a reminder that we have, as a public school system, we have a responsibility to educate every child who comes into our doors. If you come and you register in our school system, we need to have a place for you. So we need to plan to have a place for you. We need to make sure that we have that capacity and that we can always flex up if we get additional students who are coming across our doorstep. So just 2 points to consider as you're continuing to mull this over.
Mhm. Thank you, Christina. Michael?
Yeah, and I know we're kind of moving away from this topic, so I'm actually hoping to ask a question similar, but coming at it from a different angle. Has there been any knowledge that this group knows of in regards to teacher retention over the next year? We're talking about hiring new teachers, and I'm guessing that's going to look a lot different if we were to have a whole bunch of teachers decide not to come back, what that looks like in regards to the budget versus new hires versus keeping this current staff. And again, maybe it's something we can't answer right away, but I just kind of wondered if that would have an impact on the budget process or not.
It's a good question. Leslie, do you have any data on that? And I don't know if that's a question for our HR team, or if you know anything, if that came up at all in the budget conversations. It's a good question, Michael.
Yeah, no, I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. And I don't know that our HR team has that. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens at the end of this year.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with our teacher cadre and what people are going to decide to do after this year, because it's been a rough year.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the other things that we're talking about, and I know that the school board wants and the governor wants, is, you know, robust summer school. I don't know how many teachers are going to be willing to teach summer school this summer after the year that they've been through. If there are teachers out there who are willing to do that, my hat is off to them, because what I can't even imagine. But so that's going to be another issue as well, is can we even put up a summer school if we can't hire anybody to teach summer school? But it's a good thought. I just don't have the information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will say that there's an HR monitoring report. I'm trying to pull up the agenda. I can't remember if it is the next board meeting on March 11th or the meeting on March 25th, but there is an HR update that's coming soon.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you, Christina. And I encourage everyone, we've been encouraging everyone, as you know, this year to watch and listen to as many board meetings as possible. So, and now that they're all online, it's easy to do. At any time of the day or night, just carry your iPad with you and watch the board meeting. It's a public service announcement. Leslie's laughing. You can do it while you do laundry. You can do it while you go for a walk. You can do it while you do whatever you want, but just watch the board meetings. You learn a lot there. And so thank you, Christina. I think that one will be well worth all of us listening to or watching. Okay. Leslie, you were going to pivot for us.
Yes, I'm going to pivot. We're going to talk budget document. So I'm going to go there. I happen to have mine open. If you're looking at the budget document online, there is a very helpful little tab right over here that is the bookmarks bar. And if you click on that, it will take you to, you'll see basically the table of contents here. And you can open it and you can go to like any particular section of the budget that you want. If you want to go to a specific school, you can go to the school. You want to go see your elementary school, you can go see, Glebe. If that's your school, you can go see what the budget for Glebe is. So this is a very useful tool to go quickly to the place you want to go to. Another trick, I think we do it in the proposed, I know we do it in the adopted budget, is if you go into the table of contents. No, we didn't do that. Oh yeah, we did. There you go. If you go to the table of contents, online anyway, and you're in the table of contents, you're like, oh, enrollment projections, that's where I want to go. And you click on the page number, it will take you immediately to that page. And you don't have to try to flip through the entire budget document to find that. All right, quick navigation tips. Let's talk about what you should be focusing on. The budget at a glance is useful because it gives you very, 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 very high level of what the changes are in the budget. And then the building the budget section, which is always the thing that I tell people is the first thing that you should read. And if you've read it, I would urge you, and you've only read it once, I would urge you to go and read it again. There is a lot of material here. I think if you read it first, just to gain, summary knowledge, and then you go back and read it again for content, I think you'll get you'll get a lot more out of it than you would have if you just read it once through. One of the things that I would also recommend is if there's any place in the executive summary that tells, in this building the budget section, that tells you to go to a different page in the budget document, I urge you to do that. If it says more detail can be found on page XXX, then go to that page, look at what that detail is, and then come back. But only do that on your second read through, not the first read through. Let's see, what else would I say? I would also say that you should look at each of these charts and look at each of the individual things in the charts. But when you get to the areas where it starts to tell you what each of the individual things are, the individual write-ups. So like there's a resource adoption, there's resource adoptions, there's French adoption, immersion, Spanish language arts, and English language arts. Take that and say, okay, there's a resource adoption, we're adding money for that, and skip all of the narrative the first time through. Just read it for that overall summary of what's going on. Go to the diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay, we're adding funds for diversity, equity, inclusion. What are they for? Okay, and move on and take in that whole picture first. And I would say don't even go into the tiered reductions on your first time through. Just read the actual meat of the budget first. Then I would go back and I would take the time to read through each of the different narratives that support the requests that are being made. And then I would go to the tiered reductions and I would read through those. The first time through, I would just look at the charts and get an idea of what's being proposed. And then the second time, I would go through and read the individual tiered reduction narratives and what they are, what the impact would be. And keep in mind, the tiers that they're in and understanding why they're in tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 or 4 or whatever it is. Let me think. That's really what I would concentrate on. The budget forecast is also a good piece in the executive summary to look at, because we do try to provide, okay, if we have this budget, then this is what out years are going to look like if we adopt this budget the way that it is, or if we don't. So when you look at the budget forecast, at the very bottom, it'll tell you what the surplus or shortfall is, and of course, it's always a shortfall. The first shortfall number that you'll see is the shortfall based on projected revenue and an ever-increasing budget. So it's based on the $704.4 million from FY22 proposed being the starting point for next year's budget. And then at all the additions in that budget for FY23 leads us with a $64 million budget. And then if we start with that budget's expenditures and then add the expenditures on that we're projecting, then we'd have a $91 million budget deficit. So you can see it does expand if we keep increasing our expenditures and the revenue stays the way we're projecting it. If the forecast for revenue changes and we get more revenue, that's great. But it's still not going to be enough to help us close our budget gap every year. It's just not, because our gap is so big. And you can see here, if we balance to our projected revenue each year, and that's what we use to determine what the shortfall for the following year is going to be, we're going to have $22 million shortfall, and then a $24 million shortfall, and then an $18 million shortfall. And the county revenue that we receive will likely not be enough to cover each of those shortfalls in the out years. And that's, without putting a whole bunch of new stuff in, some new stuff, and a compensation adjustment and enrollment, but that's really it. And there's still a large deficit, which means something's got to be cut.
Leslie, you have a hand up from Chuck.
Thank you. Chuck?
Leslie, is there a sense of, from a planning perspective, if the county increases the tax rate by X, how much additional revenue that may yield? Is there some sort of factor that you guys have that you use for that, or is that just something you kind of wait for the county manager to declare?
No, there's a formula. I think it's like it used to be about $7.8 million equals 1 cent. 1 cent yields $7.8 million overall to the county, of which we would receive 47%. But the county board has advertised a flat tax rate. And that means that they cannot increase the tax rate at all for next year. So we're not going to be getting any additional funds from the county through a tax rate increase.
Yes. I'm just, as we look ahead, we think about things we have to do now to, you look at 111 million, in the out year. I think just getting a sense of, if this story remains to be true, what things might have to be done within Arlington County if we can't adjust expenditure. How do we adjust the revenue side? Just thinking like how big of a scale would it have to be to close that? And all of us have I think a political sense of what may or may not be acceptable to the citizens. So just trying to understand, I guess, the order of magnitude of what may have to be done would be helpful. But thanks for that tidbit. That helps.
Yep. Sounds like with what 1 cent would bring us, that this is way out of bounds of what the tax rate is going to do for us. Sounds like we need some structural changes within our own house, as well as we can't sit and wait for a tax increase to help us out of this. It isn't a small issue. It sounds like there's a whole lot of things that may need to happen here.
It's not a small issue. One of the things that has been debated among school board and county board members is whether or not our revenue share should change because our enrollment has been increasing. When the revenue sharing originally started, it didn't have that enrollment piece in it. And 2 years in, they changed it to factor in that enrollment. So there was the revenue share of whatever percentage that was. And then if our enrollment increased and we needed additional funds for that enrollment, there was a big, huge calculation that took place, then we would get those funds as well. And that changed what the percentage was for the following year. And so the following year, we started with a different percentage, and then we added the enrollment on top, and then that changed the percentage again. And so it started creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, and the county was like, whoa, we need to stop this because it's getting out of hand. And the formula was changed again. And so now the formula only changes with a tax rate increase that is provided only to schools, or more to schools than to the county. So if they had a 1 cent tax increase and they said 3/4 of a cent is for the schools and 1/4 of a cent is for the county, then that would change the revenue sharing percentage. But just raising the tax rate by 1 cent doesn't change our revenue sharing. So in the last number of years where there's been no enrollment calculation, our enrollment has increased 5, 6, 7,000 students. And there's been no additional funding for that increase in students, just the normal increase in revenue based on increases in assessments, and there have been some tax rate increases that has helped us, but for the most part there's been no factor for that enrollment. So that's been something that's been discussed as well.
Chuck, your hand's back up.
Yeah, I guess it leads to a follow-on as we think about, position advice that we offer either now, for the budget piece, or we look at to the end of the year for. It seems like maybe there's a third lever, which is, understanding, based on the growth of the school system relative to other departments within the county, what their expenditures have, based on usage and things like that. Maybe that's a third lever to think about as we, try to scale this problem back to something that could be more easily managed than just taking a meat cleaver to, really will be personnel, because that will be the only way you get to solving the problem. Would that be a fair way to look at it as well, or another way to look at it?
That is another way to look at it. And, the county has pushed back to say, we have more citizens now as well. But there's not that direct correlation between an extra 100 citizens and the number of staff that you need on the county side versus an extra 100 students in the school district.
Right.
Necessarily means additional staff. 1,000 students in the school district means we need more staff. We have no recourse.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, Leslie.
Okay. I think I'm done with the talk about the actual budget document. Unless people have questions or they want me to go into some piece more specifically.
Any questions from folks about the budget document, or anything that felt confusing or you wanted a little more clarity on while Leslie's in the document? Bob? Oh no, sorry, Lisa.
Leslie, was there a piece in this document that talks about pandemic expenses specifically?
No. No, we don't have any specific pandemic expenses in the 22 budget.
And does this document, so are we assuming with this budget that we're just going back to a regular school year next year and that the buses will be full?
Yes.
Okay.
And if that doesn't hold true, then we will need even more money than we have in the budget.
Other thoughts, questions, reactions? Lisa?
I do
actually,
go ahead, Lisa. Follow up from Lisa.
When we have the piece that talks about the ASL interpreters for the employees, did we suddenly get a bunch of new deaf employees, or where was that in the budget previously?
We did not have as many, but with the school board's implementation, I guess, institution of ASL as a world language in the schools. The staff who are teaching ASL, a lot of them are deaf or hard of hearing themselves and require an ASL interpreter for the time that they are teaching. And in fact, they require two because they need to trade off. They can only interpret for a certain period of time and then someone else needs to do the interpreting. So we do have to hire 2 ASL interpreters for each staff member.
Okay, so that was teaching staff. Thank you.
Yes, teaching staff. Although we could have deaf or hard of hearing other staff as well that we would have to provide the ASL interpreters for as well. But it's primarily the result of teaching staff. One thing I did want to talk about that we haven't talked about is the fact that there is a good chance that we will receive some additional funds under the American Rescue Plan. That's the plan that's currently in Congress. The relief bill that's currently in Congress that was passed by the House. It's with the Senate now. And we hope that there will be, some closure on this in the next week, by the end of the week. Based on information that we had at the time that we did the presentation, APS could receive an additional $20.5 million from the American Rescue Plan, which would be very excellent, right? It really would help us. The one concern that I have and why I'm not, rejoicing completely about it is I have no idea what the requirements or guidelines around what we can use the money for will be. So we have to have the specific categories of expenditure in our budget that we can claim those funds for. And if that doesn't include, increased enrollment, compensation increase, additional staff, because we want to increase the planning factor for pre-K assistants, I don't know why that one stuck out, then we might not be able to access all $20.5 million to help us, close our budget gap. And that's something that we still need to see what that looks like once those funds have been approved and we see what the framework is around the funds. Then we'll have a better idea of whether or not those $20.5 million will be, I don't know that we can count on all $20.5 million to help close our $42.5 million gap, because we'd have to have the expenditures that correspond with the things that are allowed.
Leslie, what happens if we were allocated the $20.5 million and we didn't have all of the expenditures, would we just have to give the money back? And you mentioned in your list things that were additions. Could we not apply it to base budget? I mean, I imagine with $700 million of expenses, we have quite a range of expenses we could apply it to. Do you think it's likely that they would want expenses that we don't have in a very varied $700 million budget?
Well, the funding that we've gotten up to this point has been, kind of specific around, you can use it for, PPE. You can use it for staff who are completely repurposed to help with distance learning. You can use it for health and safety, and that includes like the hiring of additional bus drivers and bus attendants because we can't put more than 11 students on a bus. You can use it for HVAC stuff. You can use it for, what are the categories?
Very, very specific. Okay, you're
Some
giving
administrative expenses, but administrative expenses for those people who have spent, their time dealing directly with
Yep.
the changes that we've needed to make as a result of the pandemic and distance learning and hybrid and all of that kind of stuff. So they've been quite specific. Now, we've heard anecdotally that this is a much looser pot of money, but we haven't seen that. We don't have the specifics around that yet. So that remains to be seen.
Okay, and then
I hope that we can just throw it at the budget and be done and say all 20.5 million, we can use it all to do whatever we need to in the budget. And so our real deficit is only $22 million. I would love it for that to be the case,
right.
But I'm very skeptical and pragmatic about it, and
right.
knowing that there's a possibility that wouldn't work.
Or at least we'll take that it's widely written enough that we have those categories in the budget. And isn't it saying something about our year that you would be thrilled that we only have a $22 million budget gap? Okay, she answered your question. Okay, wait, great. I thought so, but wanted to make sure. Okay, so I think we have time for one or two more questions before we transition, unless Leslie, you had something else very specific you wanted to show us. I just want to make sure we had enough time for me to outline, what, and start to get into what we were thinking about for exercise, but I don't want to cut this short. So if people have a lot more questions for you, or if you had something else that you wanted to do, this is what this meeting was largely about, and I can definitely cut back my explanation of our activity to 15 minutes if we need to do that. I don't need a whole half an hour. So, but I
think I'm done, unless anybody has any specific questions about how they should read the book. But other than that, I think I'm good.
Okay. Other top line questions for Leslie, and Leslie, we have so appreciated this, but other top line questions for Leslie before she disappears, and she just did. But before she disappears.
Sorry, I'm having some problems with my eyes. They're really
okay. You know what it is you've been up too many hours. Don't stay on camera. You don't have to stay on camera. Take yourself off camera. I was just kind of teasing you that you I was going to say before she disappears, and then you were back. We know you're in the background there, so it is okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I know. I know you're there. I was teasing. But other questions for Leslie, because we wanted to make sure that folks really felt like they had a good overview. Bob?
Yes, thank you. Leslie, I've actually been studying the planning factors, and I was noticing that our kindergarten planning factor is actually higher than grades 1 and 2. Also, I'm sorry, I've lost the bubble on our implementation of preschool, and there are no planning factors associated with preschool. Can you comment on both of those two things, please? Do you know why we have more students per teacher at kindergarten than we do in first and second, or first grade anyway?
Yes, we have more students in the kindergarten level because we have an instructional assistant in every kindergarten classroom.
Oh, okay, right. So it doesn't all show up under the one. Yeah, there's another divisor in there then. Okay, right. And what is the status of preschool?
What do you mean? What is the status of preschool?
Well, I know that we were supposed to be starting to implement that, but I don't see. Is that thrown out the window now? And there are no planning factors for it.
There are no planning factors. Well, there are planning factors for pre-K. If you look on page 2 of the planning factor document, there is a planning factor for primary Montessori, where there is.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, so they have a planning factor. The And at the top of that page, the pre-K program, there's one teacher and one assistant for 1 to 16 students.
Oh, I totally missed that. I'm sorry, I totally missed that line.
Yep, it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, other questions for Leslie before we transition? No? Okay. So then let me set up what I think is where we're trying to get to. And then how I think it would be helpful for us to collect and review comments over the next couple of weeks. And like I said, we have the end of our this conversation tonight, so we have about half an hour left tonight. We have a full meeting next week, so it is the 10th. And then we have half of our meeting on the 17th. Like I said, I have invited Reed Goldstein to come to the second half of that meeting and talk about his equity funding proposal that he is working on, which would impact next year or a future year's budget. But he has a timeline on that, and so he asked specifically to see us during a March meeting, and I thought doing it at the end of this process would probably be the most convenient for us, so that would allow us to really talk through the budget in that more contiguous fashion, and then talk to him about that proposal. And so I wanted to fashion our exercise off of what we did in the fall, and I recognize that I've got a couple folks, Sal and Michael, were not with us in the fall. So I'll go into a little bit more detail, but I think that Sal and Michael, I shared this document with you when I shared all of the overview documents. In the fall, to remind everyone, we were asked by Monique and all the other advisory councils to collect a number of ideas on how we could close the budget gap. We didn't have as many meetings, or we didn't have the same kind of timeline and gathering opportunities during that time. And so we did most of this work asynchronously and shared ideas over email, which I collected into a document, and we discussed in one meeting, and we shared with Leslie, which were our ideas unconnected to a budget, but based on our own experiences, either having gone through these budget cycles before, having been exposed to the school community in very different ways, given all of our various activities in the community. And we collected all of our ideas together. We discussed them. We also discussed the fact that not all of us agreed with every one of them and how we would present that. And we wrote it up into a several-page document of ideas. And obviously there were no numbers attached at that point, but we shared them with Monique, the board, Leslie, the superintendent, as coming from the back when we did them, and they were in several sections. That was an exercise that allowed us to get a lot of different ideas out in some detail, and hopefully was helpful to those involved. It was taking an idea from that and thinking back on how we've done this exercise in past years. It's not particularly helpful for us to weigh in on every single thing in the budget book, or to vote or debate on every single cut here. The tough thing is we're going to have to make, in order to make $20 million, make up $20 million of gap or $40 million of gap, whichever one it is, there unfortunately are going to have to be a number of cuts this year. And so how I propose that we actually go through our comments is that we structure them, and I'm happy to send something out and have you all, send things back to me tonight after the meeting to put into this structure. I will pull it together, and then we can walk through it in next week's meeting. But is that we collect top line thoughts on the budget. These are kind of bigger structural thoughts. Like, they can be things like, we are particularly concerned that most of the cuts in this budget are short one-time cuts, when we have kind of larger structural deficits coming over the next several years. This is not that we have a one-year gap because of coronavirus and things look like they go back to normal over the next 3 years. We have a growing structural budget gap. And so For me, one of my comments would be that I'm concerned that many of the cuts in this budget are one-time cuts that don't make structural changes that persist over the coming years. So that to me would be a top line budget comment to me. So we can make some top line comments about the budget overall. Then I think we should go and next we would collect comments on the revenue side of the budget. For example, one of the things that I observed is that I don't see a lot of new use of fees in this budget. To me, that would also be a structural thing that would persist. I'll borrow something that I put into our comments in the fall, is that some of our neighboring districts have a more liberal use of fees for things like sports and activities on a sliding scale to make sure they take equity into account, but they charge more for the outside of the classroom activities that students participate in, knowing that they have similar budget challenges than we do, and we have less of that in our district. And so, there is a lack of that in my mind in this budget. And so I would put something like that in the revenue side. Chuck might put something in about the fact that he thinks we need to, and put words in his mouth, but he thinks we need to go negotiate hard with the county in terms of, what our funding formula looks like and how we can balance the other side, because he often makes comments about how to balance the budget from that direction. And so, we would bring different perspectives, but those would both be revenue side comments that would come into our revenue side of the equation. Then we would collect comments on the expense side, and I suggest we collect them we look at the tiers, but then we also look at what isn't in the tiers. And so I think we look at it from a couple different angles. We do give our comments on sort of tier 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of what is and isn't in there. Again, I think there is knowing we have to, I don't want to debate every cut because we're going to have to make a lot of them. And I think that is an exercise we'll never get through and we won't win. But I think it's fair to say there may be something that you feel very strongly about that shouldn't be on the cut list. Now, of course, we'd have to find money somewhere else likely to offset that because this is a budget that already it probably uses too much reserves to balance itself. That would be one of my comments is I get really nervous if we're going to use up all the reserves in one year when we have a lot of, we have deficits coming in future years. That would be one of my comments. But I think it's very fair if someone looked at the cuts on the list and said, for example, gosh, I'm really concerned that you're going to cut after school buses, which in a budget that thinks so much about equity, that's an equity issue. Especially could be an equity issue for some of the schools that are not on local transportation routes. And so how are those kids going to stay after school for activities or for extra help if they have two working parents who don't have anyone else to pick them up after school and they can't hop an art bus home and there's no local library they can sit at until their parents can come get them. And so that's, a fair thing that we can say, hey, there's a few of those or a couple of those that we feel, strongly about. We probably can't put a ton of those on there and still feel like we're contributing to helping balance the budget, but I think it's fair that we may have a few of those comments. I think it's also fair that if you look, and this certainly happened with me, if you look elsewhere in the budget, there may be other things that we say, gosh, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm personally not sure why we would take and set up a in-house counsel office that costs more than outsourcing legal services. So to me, in a year, you have a $42 million budget gap. You continue to pay outside counsel if creating a inside counsel office costs more than just continuing to outsource legal services. Like, I'm not sure why you do that. So I'd rather save the after school budgets. So, to me, I'd find those trade-offs in the budget. But I think we do need to do all this with an eye to, we have a pretty big budget gap. And so I'm not sure we want to be the committee that tried to save all the costs and not balance the budget. I think we do need to help the school board figure out how to balance the budget, but I think it's very fair that we may have some, or we will have some comments about how we think they should get there. And so I would love to and I can, write out a structure to help people send comments, and then I can collect those comments, put them together, and we can discuss the comments in our next meeting. But I wanted to pause there and get people's thoughts. I typed up my own comments in the structure to make sure that I had an idea that it would work after I read the budget. But I think it kind of feels a lot like the exercise we did in the fall, and therefore I think it is a doable one for us as a committee and can get some nuanced and helpful thoughts to the school board. And I have a comment in the, oh no, looks like it's an old comment. Okay. Thoughts or comments from the group?
Well, Melody, this is one. I think this is an excellent suggestion in moving forward for the committee to frame all of our thoughts into personal documents and submit it, and then look at it from the perspective of what is realistic to the body to gather a consensus on.
Okay, great. And I'm happy to take I don't need you all don't have to be too, you can send me your comments and I can aggregate them into one. I don't need people, being too formal in how they write things up, just enough so that I can get them into one central document. But if people can send them to me, that'd be very helpful. And like I said, I'll send out something in my follow-up email, which will give people the sections. And then if they can type me up bullets, and then I can put the bullets together into a central document that'll just help us, and we can use that central document for running through a next meeting, and I'll send it out to everybody in advance. Lisa, I think I saw your hand up too, but you put it down. Did you mean to put it down?
Yep, what you said was what I was wondering, so we're good.
Okay. Thoughts from others? And by the way, for those who flagged the enrollment question tonight, I flagged it. I mean, I think Liz is absolutely right that there's certainly two sides to this, and it's nuanced and it's tough. But I flagged it when I looked through the budget that I think it's like finding the Goldilocks oatmeal temperature, and it's hard, which is trying to figure out what's not too much so we're not sitting there overstaffed in a year where we have such a tough budget deficit, and not getting so lean that Leslie's right. We're scrambling in the fall and we don't have enough teachers, and the kids are suffering because of that, and we can't find good teachers. And I know that's incredibly tough, but for those who flagged that issue tonight, I did flag that in my initial comments too. So feel free, anyone, to send me. And what I'll do is I'll aggregate. So if people have the same theme, I'll try to put the theme down once, and so we're not discussing the same thing over and over, but I'll try to consolidate. What I'll just ask is I need to give people a deadline, because my ability to work on this is really, unfortunately, right now constrained to the weekend. And so I'm just going to give people a deadline of a time on Saturday that I need this all in, so that I have some weekend time to work on it, because my job right now doesn't allow a lot of flexibility during the week. And so I will just, when I send out my note, I'll pick a time on Saturday, just ask everybody. I know some of you also have the same kind of jobs, that if you therefore on Friday night or Saturday can type up your comments beforehand, that'll give me Saturday night and Sunday to get it all together and to get it out to you as a committee by the end of the weekend. And then we can have it for Wednesday's discussion. Oh, and Bob, you were asking about budget book pickup. Yes, I had written this week. Leslie had offered a time this week. I'm not sure if she's offering another time. Leslie, I think that one's for you. Is there another time where people can pick up budget book? Looks like Bob missed this week.
Yeah, it depends on who's in the office. I won't be in the office tomorrow. I will be there Friday morning.
Do we have to see you, Leslie? Don't you just have staff that can just hand it to us?
I am talking about staff, Lisa. I'm talking about everybody in the office is not there every day.
But is it someone? I'm just wondering.
Well, for example, today there was no one from the budget office in the office. So yeah, there are times when no one's in the office. And I have to see what people's schedule is before I can tell you exactly when someone is available in the office to hand you a budget document. I know it sounds
That's
crazy,
okay.
but that's the way it is.
It's a crazy year, Leslie. It's okay. When do you want, is there a time you can give us another idea of when there may be good pickup window?
I need to check and then I can send you an email.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll try to keep an eye out for that. Josh, I see you just joined,
And I know that I will be there on Friday morning if anybody wants to come by on Friday morning.
What hours will you be there?
Let's say 9 to 1.
Okay. Great. So everyone heard that, 9 to 1, and then I assume they can email you directly to set it up.
Yep.
Okay. Super. Thank you. Okay, Nellie.
Hi. Yeah, this question is for Leslie. I was wondering if there's like a defined point at which the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office takes a chop on the budget, or if their input is just more kind of throughout the entire process.
That's a good question. This was a very different year, so we didn't have the opportunity really to do that. There was weigh-in through the process, but there wasn't like a real equity evaluation process this year. And that is something that we want to try to institute for the next budget cycle. We have to figure out what that looks like, of course, before we actually put the budget through it. But yeah, there's definitely some desire to come at the budget from that equity lens.
Thank you, Leslie.
Other thoughts and questions? Josh, I see that you joined us. Must mean the ACTC meeting is over. We're actually getting close to the end here. I don't know, Josh, if you we never did public comment. If you had a couple of thoughts you wanted to share with the group quickly as we're winding down.
I will be extremely brief because I'd rather talk with you afterwards to see what you all have talked about, so I don't repeat anything other than to say that the AEA is committed to getting this budget in alignment as possible, and I am a member of Club 535 as I have read the entire budget and took notes as well. So I will put more thoughtful comments at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Okay. Other thoughts, questions, comments for Leslie or for me? Leslie's offered time to pick up the budget book. I will send a follow-up note in how to structure your bullets to me, which I can aggregate and send out, and make sure that everyone's voice is in the next round in terms of getting everyone's thoughts all together in one place for discussion. And I'm looking forward to that. And I do encourage everyone to send me thoughts because I think that is a good way to start out with a little bit of input from everyone, because I know that group discussion can be hard. It has been hard at times in the past, even with all of us in the room. And I know that it can be hard over Teams or Zoom or whatever virtual platform. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we had something where even if you feel like we don't get quite enough discussion, that your voice is in the mix in this document. And that's why I chose this format, or one of the reasons I chose this format. Excellent. Thank you, Sal. Okay. If we don't have any other comments, then I'm going to give you all back a few extra minutes, and I'm going to go get to writing my email and to get it out to you tonight. And I will remember to attach the minutes this time. Chuck, did you have something else? No? Okay, everyone's just come back. Oh,
just for those new to the process, just we have to be cautious about not violating the open meeting rules.
Yes.
So, large discussions taking place on email can't happen. So just.
Yes, great. Thank you, Chuck, for remembering that. Please just send your comments to me. And yeah, they shouldn't be group discussions. So don't reply all with your comments. I know it is tempting that we would all share around and comment with each other, but that could trigger the public meeting rule, and then all of our emails would be subject to disclosure. And I think we would prefer that not to happen. And so just send your comments to me. I'll put them in a document. We'll share the document all together. You all see them. Of course, subject to my editing to try and make them fit together and put like subjects together, but hopefully you all trust me to do that. And if anyone feels like I haven't accurately captured their comment, the nice thing about this one is you're going to have 2 or 3 rounds at the document, and you can let me know if you feel like you need me to capture it differently so your voice is heard. I will do that. So I will try to be as true to the process as possible, but also get us into kind of one voice document. And I'm happy to spend a little time massaging that and see where we come out. And we can happily debate all together and individually. And you all have my phone number on the contact list as we go through this. And I'm happy to take individual calls as we go through over the next few weeks, and even after the 17th as we finalize the document, because April 6th is the day that I go and join one of the working sessions and talk to the board. I don't think it's a very long session, but that is our one chance to go and share, although we do then pass in our written comments as well. Christina, do you have anything else you want to share about that or anything else? I know we've appreciated having you here, but we captured everything okay?
No, I think that's captured everything. And I've really appreciated, actually, let me come off video. Really appreciated listening to the discussion. I think that the discussion y'all are having is really robust and nuanced. And so get those comments into Melanie so that we can document that and share that with the rest of the board. And I will be reporting out to this on this particular meeting for my colleagues.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you all. I very much appreciate this. Leslie, I really appreciate I know it's been an incredibly busy few weeks for you, but thank you very much for taking one more spin through all of this with us, and then for hanging out with us for 3 Wednesdays in a row as we do our busiest work during the year.
Every Wednesday with you, every Tuesday with the board. There you go. And if there are questions that people have that make a difference one way or the other for you when you're putting your thoughts together, send them to Melanie. I hate to do this to you, Melanie, but send questions for me to Melanie, and she can kind of aggregate them and send them to me, and I will try to answer them. Just bear in mind that we are answering board budget questions as well, and I'm still trying to get FY21 onto good firm standing, and working on the mid-year report to provide to the board on that. So a lot of stuff going on, but if you have some specific questions, and when I say specific questions, like, can you tell me X, not philosophical discussions. I can't do that, but specific questions that would help you interpret some of the things in the book, then feel free to send them in, and I'll try to get some answers to you.
Okay. Thank you, Leslie. That's much appreciated. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for spending time with. Oh, Lisa, one more question from Lisa. Go ahead.
Thanks, Leslie. But I have one last question. Is there a contingency fund this year or not?
When you say contingency funds, define contingency funds.
That fund that generally, when things come up and you say, oh, it was in the contingency fund, but now we've pulled it out and you can see it in the budget, that contingency fund.
That's the staffing contingency. And yes, we have that in the budget. That's what we use to provide additional staff over the course of the summer as the information about the students who are going to be showing up in the fall starts to trickle in for both regular classroom teachers and special education, a lot of special education, and also some English learner staff. But we do have that staffing contingency in the budget. Typically, we use all of that contingency in a normal year. We didn't use it all in this fiscal year because our September 2020 enrollment was quite a bit lower. But typically, we use all of it and sometimes more.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. Okay, and with that, I think that's it. I think the meeting's adjourned, and I appreciate you all. Thank you. I will talk to you. I'll see you on email individually, and I'll see you again all together next week. Okay. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Good evening.